Okay, so 4.2 is where we're going to cut off the first part of chapter 4. So when we do the rest of the chapter, it will be next unit. So this will be the last section for this test that y'all are going to have. So with 4.2, we're going to do factoring, which factoring isn't new. You've done that since Algebra 1. And I know you did a little bit in geometry. Maybe not to this extent, but you did a little bit of it in geometry. So it shouldn't be a completely new concept, okay? So what we're going to do is break it into sections. We've got GCF, difference of two squares, and then trinomials, okay? And then when we get to chapter 5, we're going to do polynomials. This is quadratics. Then we do polynomials, and factoring will come back. So factoring is one concept in math. It never goes away. You will use that every single year that you are in education and do a math course, okay? So with GCF, okay, that's your greatest common factor. You're going to have however many terms, 2, 3, 7, and we're not going to give you 7, but the concept is you have to divide all of the terms in your problem by the same thing. Okay, so that's your GCF, your greatest common factor. So then you also have variables. So with your variables, it says you're going to take the smallest exponent as your GCF when you have variables. Okay, so if I had x to the 5th and x cubed is smaller than x to the 5th, so I would choose that. Okay, the reason being is because we're going to divide the polynomial by your GCF, and you want to divide larger by smaller, not smaller by larger. Okay, so when we write it, you're going to take the GCF that you have and you're going to write it out front. And then in parentheses, you'll have whatever is left once you divide. Okay, so your answer always has to include the GCF or you're going to lose credit. Okay, so if I'm looking at 2x to the 4th minus 4x squared, between 2 and 4, what can I take for my GCF? 2. I could divide each of those by 2. And then x to the 4th and x squared, which one is my smaller exponent? X squared. So 2x squared would be my full GCF. Okay, so what I do is I take each term and I divide that by my 2x squared. And then for my answer, I take that 2x squared and I bring it down. And then I start a set of parentheses. And whatever is inside parentheses is what I get once I divide. So if I divide 2 by 2, that leaves me with just 1. And then x to the 4th over x squared, you subtract our exponents. You don't divide them, okay? Your exponents you're going to subtract. So 4 minus 2 is going to leave me with x squared. And then I look at my next one, negative 4 divided by 2 is a negative 2. X squared divided by x squared, I have 2, and I'm taking 2 away. That cancels to 1, so it's just a 2. Okay, so 2x squared times x squared minus 2 is my answer. And you can always check by distributing that GCF back through, and you should get your original. Okay, so then if I look at 3 terms, I have 4x to the 5th minus 6x cubed plus 14x squared. Okay, I'm going to look. 4, negative 6, and 14 all need to be divided by the same thing. So what would be my GCF between those numbers? Also a 2, and then x to the 5th, x cubed, and x squared. Which one would I choose? X squared. So it just so happens that they're both 2x squared. It's just a coincidence. But we're going to divide all 3 of those terms by the 2x squared and bring that down in front of my parentheses. Okay, so then 4x to the 5th divided by 2x squared is going to leave me with what? 2x cubed. Okay, remember you're taking 5 minus 2, and that gives you the 3. Okay, and then negative 6x cubed divided by 2x squared is going to leave me with negative 3x. And then 14x squared divided by 2x squared is going to leave me with 7. There is no longer an x because x squared over x squared cancels. Okay, so then the difference of 2 squares. Okay, So the difference of two squares, you have to have specific criteria for it to meet this. Okay. So the name of it tells you exactly what you need. Difference means there better be a minus sign. Two means there's two terms. So you're going to have a binomial, which means two terms. If it has more than two terms, difference of two squares does not apply. Okay, you have to have a minus. If it's a plus, it does not apply to the difference of two squares. Okay, and then the perfect squares, your numbers have to be perfect squares and your exponents have to be even. Okay, so it's got to meet all of that before you can use your formula. Okay, now the formula tells me if I have a squared minus b squared, I can factor it into a plus b and a minus b. Okay, so these two are the exact same thing. One's a plus, one's a minus. Okay, so think back to what you just did. What does this remind you of? Same thing, one's a plus, one's a minus. Y'all just used it on y'all's quick conjugates. Okay, so these are conjugates. You take, if you go in reverse, you take the first term squared minus the second term squared. So we're going backwards. Okay, you cannot factor the sum of two squares unless you can take out a GCF and it leads you to a negative in the middle. Okay, so you have to be careful with that. It will look like it's the difference of two squares, but again, you have to have a minus on a plus. Okay, so if I start with x squared minus 4, I've got two terms, I've got my minus, 4 is a perfect square, this has an even exponent, so I can do my formula. Okay, so if I know it's the difference of two squares, I set up my parentheses. I know one's a plus and one's a minus. Okay, then to get my terms, I just take the square root. So the square root of x squared is x, and that goes in the first spot. And then the square root of 4 is 2. So x plus 2, x minus 2 is what it's going to factor. Okay. So then 4x squared minus 9, is that the difference of two squares? So I have my parentheses, one's a plus, one's a minus. When I take the square root of 4x squared, the square root of 4 is 2, the square root of x squared is x, so I'm going to have 2x and 2x. And then the square root of 9 is 3. So 2x plus 3, 2x minus 3 will be what it factors. Okay. Now, if I have x squared plus 16, is that the difference of two squares?
Yeah.
No. It's the sum of two squares because I have a plus. So then I would check, can I take out a GCF? Between x squared and 16, there's no GCF. So you can either tell me not factorable, or you can tell me it's prime. I think on my answer key, if I have it, I probably put prime. Okay, so either one of those, not factorable or prime. Okay. Now, if I have negative 4x squared plus 16, right off the bat, is that a difference of two squares? No. So then I would check, can I take out a GCF? Okay. I want to make a note of this. I have a leading negative. Even if my numbers do not have a GCF, you will always take the negative out as your GCF. Okay, doesn't matter if it's a binomial, trinomial, doesn't matter how many terms. If you have a leading negative, you always take that out as a GCF, even if it ends up being a -1. You still have to take it out, okay? But here, I've got a -4 and a 16. What can I divide those both by? 4. So I would make it a -4, so I take out that negative. I bring that GCF down. -4x squared divided by -4 leaves me with just x squared. And then 16 divided by -4 is now -4. By taking out that negative GCF, what happened here? So it creates the difference of two squares. Okay, so now I can factor this, but I have to bring my GCF down. X squared minus 4 is going to factor into what? X plus what? 2 and x minus 2. Okay? Do we have questions on that section? All right. So now that we have trinomials, which is 3 terms, you always want it in standard form, which is your x squared plus bx plus c. Now, we have a section with trinomials where a is equal to 1, so meaning I don't have a coefficient in front of x squared, and then when a is greater than 1, meaning I have a number in front of x squared, okay? So if you only have an x squared here, there's not going to be a GCF, because this coefficient is really a 1, okay? And between a 1, a 5, and a 6, I can't do anything with that, okay? So what you're going to do when you have trinomials, you are trying to find factors of your last term to add or subtract to give you your middle term, okay? Now there's a few rules here that hopefully you remember when you did factoring. If you have x squared plus bx plus c, okay, my last term, that sign is going to tell me, are they the same or are they different when I break down my factors, okay? So this last sign is going to tell me if it's a plus, my factors are going to be the same sign. If it's a minus, they're going to be different signs, okay? So if I had x squared plus bx plus c, I know I'm going to have 2 sets of parentheses, okay? I know I'm going to have an x on both of the first terms. This is a plus, so it tells me the same sign, okay? Well, I've got that down, but what sign are they going to be? They're going to be the sign of the middle, okay? So if my middle is a plus and they're the same, they're both going to be plus, okay? Now, if I have x squared minus bx plus c, I still know I'm going to have 2 sets of parentheses with my x's. I still look at my last term. My last term is a plus, so that means they're going to be the same. They're the sign of the middle. My middle is a minus, so they would be minus minus. Okay, this is going to be the pattern that you use. All right. Now, if you have x squared either plus or minus, it doesn't matter what that middle term is. If I have a minus c, then that minus tells me automatically they're going to be different signs. So one's going to be a plus, one's going to be a minus. Okay. Once you find your factors, when they are different signs, the larger factor takes the sign of the middle. Okay, so when you break your number into 2 factors, the larger sign takes the sign of the middle term. Okay? And we'll look at our examples, and that's the same for all trinomials. Okay? So the first thing I do, x squared minus 5x minus 6, I'm going to look at that last term. Are my signs of my factors going to be the same or different? They're going to be different because it's a minus. When they are different, that means I want my factors to subtract. Okay? So I'm going to take factors of my 6, which are 1 and 6, 2 and 3, and I want them to give me a 5, right? If I don't know that they're subtracting, both of these combinations could give me a 5. I could subtract 1 and 6 and get a 5, or I can add 2 and 3 and get a 5. So you have to know when they're different, you subtract. When they're the same, you add. Okay? So if I'm subtracting, which pair am I going to choose? 1 and 6. Okay. Now, one of those, if they're different, one of them has to be positive, one of them has to be negative. So this is why I say the larger factor takes the sign of the middle. Which one's the larger factor? 6. So that means 6 is going to take on the sign of the middle, which is negative. Okay, so I'm going to have x plus 1 and x minus 6. How do I know if I got it right? You could FOIL it, and it should give you your original. So if I do x times x, that gives me x squared. X times negative 6 is a negative 6x plus x minus 6. When I combine that, it gives me my original sign, and I'm good. Okay? Now, my next one, x squared minus 19x plus 48, I'm going to look at that last term. Are they the same or different? They're going to be the same because it's a plus, and so you add them. They're the same sign. They take the sign of the middle, so that means they're both going to be negative because my middle sign is negative. All right, so then when I take factors of 48, what are my factors of 48? 1 and 48, 2 and 24,
3 and 16,
3 and 16, 4 and 12, not divisible by 5, 6 and 8, not divisible by 7, and then you would just repeat 8 and 6, so I stop there. Okay, y'all all know how to get a factor table, right? Just divide the numbers. Okay, so if I know they're the same, they're going to add. Which two sets are going to add to give me 19? 3 and 16. I already put my two negatives, so I just put my numbers. Okay. Questions? All right. Now, what happens when I have a coefficient in front of x squared? This is where you have to check for a GCF. Okay. If I have 4x squared plus 28x minus 72, do I have a GCF between 4, 28, and 72? I could divide all of this by 4, and I put that 4 out front. And when I divide 4x squared by 4, it leaves me with x squared. 28x divided by 4 is 7x. And then negative 72 divided by 4 leaves me with okay. Now I just look at what's left. X squared plus 7x minus 18. I no longer have a coefficient in front of x squared, so I'll just factor it like I did. Okay, so I bring my 4. I know I've got 2 sets of parentheses. I look at this minus 18. Does that make my sign same or different? Different because it's a minus. So I'm going to have x plus and x minus. I just have to figure out what are my numbers. Okay, so I take my 18, factors of 18, 1 and 18, 2 and 9, 3 and 6. What's going to give me a 7? 2 and 9. Now they're different. My larger factor takes the sign of the middle. My middle sign is positive, so which one goes with the positive? The larger factor takes the sign of the middle, so 9.
Does it matter which one has the plus and minus?
As long as you can write it 4 times x minus 2, x plus 9. It's the same as long as the 2 is negative and the 9 is positive. Yeah, it doesn't matter which order as long as you have the right sign with the right number. Okay. All right. Now this next one, 4x squared plus 8x minus 5. Okay, I can't take a GCF out of this. So what do I do when I have a coefficient in front of x squared? Y'all remember this at all? Maybe? No? All right, you're going to have a few more steps on this one. Okay, you're going to take your first number and multiply it by your last, first times last. Okay, so 4 times 5 is going to give me 20. Now my rules as far as the signs go stay the same. Okay? So if I know that last term is negative, what does that tell me? My signs are different. One's a plus, one's a minus. Okay? Now I still want factors to give me my middle, but now I'm taking factors of 20, not factors of 5. Okay? So when I multiply 4 times 5, I get 20. My factors of 20, 1 and 20, 2 and 10, not divisible by 30, 4 and 5. You're in a hurry and you just tell me x x minus 2, x plus 10. If all I did was this and I FOILed it, that would never give me a 4x squared. Okay? So you cannot just take those like we did here. Once you get your 2, negative 2, and positive 10, you have to divide each of those numbers by that a, by that first term. I multiplied it, so I have to take it back out. Okay, so I'm going to divide each of these by 4. Negative 2 divided by 4 can simplify to what? Negative 1/2. And 10 divided by 4 can simplify to 5/2. Okay, now what does that do for me? Y'all are probably like, what is this? So what this tells you is your denominator is your coefficient of x. So I tack on an x at the bottom, and that tells me, okay, I've got 2x minus 1, and I have 2x plus 5. So now if I FOIL it, 2x times 2x, does that give me my 4x squared? Yes. And then I get a minus 2x plus 10x, which gives me my 8. And then negative 5. Okay? Now you have done this before. This is not new. You may have forgotten it, but it's not new. And I will tell you that whoever came up with this method is a genius, because this is a whole lot easier than when I was taught. You just had to know your factors of your first, your factors of your last, and find the combination by trial and error. Okay? So these steps are not hard. You find the two factors, divide them by a, simplify. There's your 2 binomials. Okay? So 2x squared plus 5x minus 3. I checked for a GCF. I don't have one. So I'm going to take first times last, 2 times 3, and that gives me a 6. Okay, before I do my factors, I'm going to determine, are my signs when I do the binomials the same or different? They're going to be different. One's going to be a plus, one's going to be a minus. So my factors of 6, 1 and 6, 2 and 3. Remember, you have to be careful with that. Am I adding or subtracting? I'm subtracting because they're different. So am I going to choose 1 and 6 or 2 and 3? 1 and 6. All right, which one's negative, which one's positive?
6.
6 is positive because it's my larger factor. All right, what do I do with that 6 and negative 1? Divide it by 2 and simplify. 6 over 2 simplifies to 3. I don't have a denominator, but I need to put something with my x. So I can just put it over x, so that you know it's x plus 3. And then the negative 1/2 doesn't simplify, so I tack on my x there. So I've got x plus 3, and then I have 2x minus 1. Okay, are you good with that? I want you to try the last one. Okay, what's my final answer?
I'm sorry, what?
Doesn't matter which order. Did y'all get both of these? Okay. No questions? Y'all are good? Alright. So, when we're solving, okay, so those are just factoring expressions. When you have equations, you are solving the equation, okay? So, step one, the equation must equal 0. Some of them will be equal to 0, some of them you have to manipulate to get it equal to 0, okay? Then you're going to factor the left side, okay? When you factor it, each step you do with solving has to be equal to 0, okay? I say this every year, and I'm very specific on this. I will take off the output equal to 0 because you no longer have an equation to solve. So if you don't have an equation, but you end up with x equals a number and x equals a number, that makes no sense algebraically, okay? So if you do not put equals 0, you're going to get points off, all right? So here, x squared plus 2x minus 8 equals 0, I'm good. Okay, so then I just factor. I want factors of 8 to give me a 2. What would I choose? 2 and 4. Which one's going to be positive? Which one's going to be negative? Positive 4 and a negative 2. If you can do it quickly, you don't have to show me a factor tree for 8. If you know your factors, I'm not going to count off if you don't have a factor tree. Okay, it will help those who need it, but you don't have to. Okay, so now that I've got x plus 4, x minus 2 equals 0, then I'm going to take each set of parentheses and set them equal to 0. Okay, so I'm going to take x plus 4 equal to 0 and x minus 2 equal to 0. Okay, that's our 0 product property. So then I'm going to subtract my 4, and x equals negative 4. Add my 2, and x equals 2. Now, when you're solving and you get specific x values, you can always store those for x, type your original, make sure it's equal to 0. Okay? Questions? All right. This next one, x squared minus 10x equals negative 25. What am I going to do with that?
I have 25 votes.
Yes, it's not equal to 0, so I need to add the 25, move it over to the left, and that's going to give me x squared minus 10x plus 25 equals 0. So now I want factors of 25 to give me a 10. What factors of 25 give me 10? 5 and 5. Now, what do I know about my signs? They're both negative. So x minus 5 equals 0. All right, notice they're the same thing. When they're the same thing, you can just set x minus 5 equal to 0 once. It's just going to create a double solution. Okay, so I add my 5, x equals 5, and I'm going to tack on a ds for double solution, and that will tell me, there's 2, they're just the same answer. So you can either solve it once and put ds, or solve them both twice. It's up to you. Okay? Questions? All right, so now, that second page you had to tear off. We're continuing. Okay, so 2x squared minus 11x plus 5 equals 0. Do I have a GCF?
No.
No. So what do I do? First times last. 2 times 5 gives me 10. Okay, what do I know about my signs? They're the same, they're both negative. So my factors of 10, 1 and 10, 2 and 5. What's going to give me 11? 1 and 10. Okay, so I've got a negative 1 and a negative 10. And what do I do with those? Divide by 2. Okay, negative 1/2 doesn't simplify, so the 2 takes the x. Negative 10 over 2 simplifies to negative 5. Put it over x. So I've got 2x minus 1 and x minus 5 equals 0. Okay, so I'm going to take my 2x minus 1 equal to 0, x minus 5 equal to 0. Add your 1 and 2x equals 1. Divide by 2 and x equals 1/2. My next one, add your 5 and x equals 5. Again, I would check all of these when you're doing your quiz and your test. Okay. Okay, this next one, 5n squared plus 2n equals 3. What do I need to do? Subtract 3. Get it equal to 0. So 5n squared plus 2n minus 3 equals 0. Do I have a GCF?
No.
No. So I go to what step? First times last. So that gives me a 15. Are my signs going to be the same or different? They're going to be different. One's going to be a plus, one's going to be a minus. So factors of 15, 1 and 15, 3 and 5. What am I going to choose? 3 and 5. Which one's positive, which one's negative? 5 is positive, 3 is negative. Then what do I do with that? Okay, 3 over 5 doesn't simplify, so I can find my x. 5 over 5 is a 1. Put it over x. So what are my two binomials?
5x plus minus
And then?
x.
So then I set x plus 1 equal to 0 and 5x minus 3 equal to 0. Subtract your 1 and x equals negative 1. Add your 3, 5x equals 3. Divide by 5 and x equals 3 over 5. Really should have been an m, not an x. My bad. Stick with the variable that you're given. Okay. My next one. What would you do first? Add 10. So 9x squared minus 21x plus 10 equals 0. Do I have a GCF? No. So 9 times 10 is 90. Okay. Are they going to be the same or different times? They're the same. They're both going to be negative. So factors of 90, 1 and 90, 2 and 3 and, can I divide it by 4? Can I divide it by 5? Yes. What is it? Okay. Can I divide it by 6? 6 and 15. Can I divide it by 7? Can I divide it by 8? What about 9? Then I would just repeat 10 and 9. Okay. So with that, what combination is going to give me 21? 6 and 15. So a negative 6 and a negative 15. And what do I do with that? Okay, negative 6 divided by 9. I can divide them both by 3. And that gives me, bottom takes the x. And then negative 15 over 9, divide them both by 3. negative 5/3, bottom takes the x. So what are my two binomials? So then I've set 3x minus 2 equal to 0, and 3x minus 5 equal to 0. Add your 2, 3x equals 2, divide by 3, and x equals 2/3. Add your 5, 3x equals 5, divide by 3, and x equals 5/3. Okay? I want you to do the next one on your own. Okay, what's my first step?
And, subtract 18.
Subtract 18, so 4x squared plus 21x minus 18 equals 0. Do I have a GCF? No, so what do?
That's why first.
Okay, 4 times negative 18 gives me, are they going to be the same or different signs? Okay. What factors of 72? Well, am I adding or subtracting? Subtracting. What factors of 72 subtract to give you 21? 3 and what? Okay, which one's positive, which one's negative?
24 times 3.
Okay, and then I take those and I do what with them? Divide by 4. That gives me 6. So I have x plus 6 and 4x minus 3 equals 0. Y'all get that? Okay. So now solve. X plus 6 equals 0. 4x minus 3 equals 0. Subtract your 6. X equals negative 6. Add your 3. 4x equals 3. Divide by 4. X equals 3/4. Okay, we good with that? Okay, this next one, 12x squared plus 75 equals 60x. What do I do?
Subtractions.
Okay, when I subtract this 60x, where does it go?
No,
In the middle. Make sure it's in standard form. So 12x squared minus 60x plus 75 equals 0. And what do I do? See if there's a GCF. If you multiply 12 and 75, you're going to have a very, very large factor table. Okay, that should be a hint that you take out a GCF. Okay, 12, 60, and 75. What is that? What can I take out? A 3. So I bring my 3 out front, and that leaves me with 4x squared minus 20x plus 25 equals 0. Bless you. Okay, now I'm just factoring what I have left. I don't even pay attention to what's up here anymore. Okay, so 4x squared minus 20x plus 25, what do I do? First times last, and that gives me 100. Now, what do I know about my signs?
those are the same.
They're the same, they're both.
Maybe,
They're both negative. Okay, my factors of 100, that will give me 20. I got 1 and 100, 2 and 50, 5 and 20, and then 10 and 10. So it's going to combine to give me 20. 10 and 10. So I take that negative 10 and negative 10 because I know they're both negative. And what do I do with it? I divide by 4, not 12, but 4. Okay, so then that both gives me negative 5 halves. Stack on your x, so I've got 2x minus 5 and 2x minus 5. What does that create? Double solution. So I can just do it twice. I mean, one time. And it just means I have the same solution. So add your 5 and 2x equals 5. Divide by 2. X equals 5 halves. And I tack on that dx for double solution. Okay. So my last one. 16x squared plus 8x plus 2 equals negative 4x. What do I do with that negative 4x? Where am I going to put it? With its like term. So I'm going to add that 4x to the 8x. So 16x squared plus 12x plus 2 equals 0. What can I do with that? So that leaves me with 8x squared plus 6x plus 1 equals 0. So now what do I do? First times last. 8 times 1 gives me 8. Factors of 8 to give me a 6.
4, not 2, 2, 4.
Mm-hmm. They're the same sign, but what do I do with them?
As the
I divide them by 8. So that gives me 1/4. And then 1/2. So I have 4x plus 1 and 2x plus 1. So 4x plus 1 equals 0, and 2x plus 1 equals 0. Subtract your 1, 4x equals -1. Divide by 4, x equals
negative 1.
-1/4. Then subtract your 1 again, 2x equals -1. Divide by 2, x equals -1/4. Now, on neither one of these, I set that GCF equal to 0. Why? I'm solving for x, right? If this is just a 3, does 3 equal 0? No. If it is a GCF that doesn't include an x, you don't have to include that equal to 0. You're only solving for your x. Okay, now in chapter 5, when we do polynomials, you might have a 3x there, and you would have to account for that. Okay, so this whole lesson, you did factoring. Okay, you're going to have a quiz over this next class. Okay, we're going to quiz, and then it's review day. We also have